today. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So I meant to reach out a long time ago for one of these discussions because I've enjoyed some of the pieces you've written. And, of course, they fall in probably to the more esoteric category of Bitcoin thought pieces, which I'm very interested in. And then I saw that you were on Rob's show, I guess last week or maybe even this week, and it kind of jogged my memory. So that's why I wanted to put this together. But perhaps for people that aren't familiar with you or haven't seen any of your work, maybe a brief introduction before we get rolling.
Sure. So I think maybe I should just speak a little bit about how I came to Bitcoin in the first place, and that would maybe help your listeners to understand, have a sense of who I am and my background. And then also, maybe I could introduce some of the concepts that we could discuss. So I first discovered Bitcoin at the end of 2010. And that was when WikiLeaks, Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, considered using Bitcoin as a way to circumvent the financial blockade. And at that time, the organization, after organization released documents relating to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, then obviously the organization was subjected to massive political retaliation by the US government. And so, therefore, Julian, who was part of notable cypherpunks, understood the significance of Bitcoin early on. So he considered using it. And at that time, I was very much kind of into WikiLeaks, and then Satoshi and later we found out like Satoshi and Julian were in conversation, and Satoshi asked Julian not to use Bitcoin at that time because the technology was still in its infancy, and then Julian complied, and then the WikiLeaks didn't use it until 6 months later in June 2011. And so at that time, I was actually at the grad school studying psychology, and WikiLeaks, with the publication of the Cloud of Matter video, significantly, profoundly changed my life. And so ever since that, I kind of got into trying to understand what WikiLeaks is and what it does and the philosophy behind it. And specifically Julian Assange's philosophy, and that led me to led me to discover philosophy of cypherpunks. And so for me, obviously, I was very intrigued with the fact that what Bitcoin can do and its censorship resistance, and I was able to see the practical application of it, and then the power that the Bitcoin provides. So it was kind of a natural progression for me to appreciate Bitcoin after, being exposed to the significance of WikiLeaks at that time. And WikiLeaks is a censorship-resistant publisher. But for me, fundamentally, I recognize WikiLeaks as a project of free software movement. So, many people think of WikiLeaks only as a journalistic organization, and which is true. But WikiLeaks is much more than journalistic organization, and at its core, it's based on the cypherpunks philosophy, and Julian Assange created a platform for democracy and found a way to enable freedom around the world. And the way WikiLeaks did it was by building a decentralized technological infrastructure and running the server through, going through the various jurisdictions, the jurisdictions that have strong freedom protection, freedom of speech protection, privacy, freedom of speech protection. And so what Julian did was Julian created a global process state on the internet, and to create safe haven for journalists and whistleblowers. And so that kind of, the creative application of cryptography, basically, by using strong cryptography and create a new state, so to speak, new state where democracy and the value of freedom are defended, are secured. So that core philosophy really fascinated me and led me to kind of study deeply about Julian's, cypherpunk's philosophy. And so, and then at the same time, what I saw was there's a trend of corporate-led globalization, the corporations, transnational corporations that have no allegiance to any nation, they are able to place themselves above the law, and the way they did it was, they basically created like offshore tax haven, for instance, in a case of, Cayman Island, for instance, or, offshore detention center in the case of Guantanamo Bay prison. And where, they could be immune from the US Constitution, right? For instance, in the case of Guantanamo Bay. And they were able to do it by harmonizing certain kind of laws, rigging the laws, and, the corporations like move to the countries that have weak in labor law, like Indonesia and China, to set up the exploitative practice of cheap labor, sweatshop type of operation, right? And they were able to do it because, they somehow find a loophole in the legal system. And then what WikiLeaks has done is that WikiLeaks was done the opposite, basically doing something similar to what corporations are doing, but they want to harmonize laws that are strong in protection of freedom, protection of human rights, to create a new state, and so that was the birth of the WikiLeaks and the project of the cypherpunks as I see it. And obviously, the WikiLeaks was not completely decentralized organization, so it was not, quite censorship resistant, right? So because of it, the Julian Assange, its founder, has been confined to prison, without charge, and he's suffering from that effect. And so when I saw Bitcoin, and I inherently saw that Bitcoin does what WikiLeaks tried to do, but it's at the code level, it's on the protocol level, that it's censorship resilient, and it's completely decentralized. And even though it requires a human labor, our network effect and everything, but it uses incentive rather than, organizing based on trust. And coordinating certain, proof of work is used as a coordination mechanism to, basically create new state, that promote, protect freedom. And then so for me, Bitcoin was really the holy grail of the cypherpunks. And I felt that Bitcoin is going to carry on what WikiLeaks tried to do and, quite haven't been able to do. So that's kind of like how I got into Bitcoin. And it was, more and more like I became more interested in Bitcoin, and shifting, I guess, my interest, I guess, toward that, maybe starting from 2013. And so that's kind of like how I got into Bitcoin. And to start off.
Yeah, thank you for that. The one of the things you mentioned in one of your pieces was that the Bitcoin rabbit hole story has become kind of like a cultural phenomenon.
Exactly.
It's like,
right.
tell me about your rabbit hole story, because it's such a profound inflection point in so many people's lives, or at least it's becoming that when the penny or when the sat really drops, because
right.
It's so transformative, because it changes how you see so many things, you want to know, like, well, when was the moment? And so I have two questions off the back of what you just said. One is, why was it that you were drawn to these issues of, broadly speaking, freedom or social justice or corruption, to be interested in the WikiLeaks stuff in the first place? And secondly, can you identify, and I know this is sometimes hard for people, because like, I think a lot of people crept into Bitcoin. It's like, oh, this is interesting, non-state money or censorship resistant money to support these different things that, the bad people don't want us to do. But that's not necessarily the moment where you go, oh, like, this is the thing. So was there a point where you went from like, oh, this is interesting, it's a means to an end for certain objectives, versus like, some of your recent writing, which is, I think one of your pieces is called the Networked Messiah, so that's a definitely a progression. So was there a point where it dropped for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I always felt that there are certain kind of universal universality among us, despite our cultural differences, gender, cultural, or religious differences, or language that we speak. There is something fundamental about humankind, and that we all want freedom, and when we look at things that are happening in the world, and historically, that the people aspire, to be free, and if myself, being born and grew up in Japan, that I really look up to the fundamental principles of the United States, equality and liberty for all the people, and then that somehow deeply spoke to me, and someone who, I wasn't really living in the U.S. I, didn't study U.S. history or anything, but somehow, what Founding Fathers did, especially Thomas Jefferson, I found a very close relationship, deep relationship with what he has done, and recognize that kind of a freedom is an innate impulse of and within all mankind, all of us. And then when I look at the Tiananmen Square protests, for instance, in China, the students are resisting against the Chinese government, and then there is this sign that says, the kind of echoes the Henry Patrick's, this "give me liberty or give me death," so that kind of, we all want freedom, and somehow, we have this culture, we have legal system, we have, certain kind of rules, I guess, that are set that restrict us, and so I was wanting to have this, I was maybe looking for a way, maybe that could secure, what it means to be human, which is the fundamental principle, fundamental value of freedom. And so, whether that is a set of rules or legal systems, or it could be a cultural thing, cultural ideals that bind us, that I was looking for it. And then, so when I first, found WikiLeaks and what WikiLeaks has done, and then WikiLeaks is a global transnational organization, and it's created a platform, for us to maybe engage in building that infrastructure, building that new set of rules, and inspiring each other based on or creating a new culture based on freedom, our love for freedom, And so when I found the Bitcoin, there were some, of course, Bitcoin and WikiLeaks share the same roots in cypherpunks philosophy. So obviously there are similarities, right? But for me, Bitcoin, the fact that it's global, it's a stateless currency, it's a transnational currency, and that it's somehow not just the Bitcoin being just a new monetary system or network, but somehow I started to recognize it, started to see the cultural phenomena, Bitcoin as a cultural phenomena, inspiring people around the world. And people kind of, I met online the people that share the same values, and people who come from a different cultural background, the language they speak, or religion, but somehow we share something in common, So that phenomena, that actually started out probably with the development of the internet, and how we started to kind of connect, people around the world started to connect online. And so it's the kind of a natural progression of that pre-internet culture, culture that is blossoming out of free internet. And the Bitcoin was the automative, to some degree, that really gives us tool to make that happen, to create a new global culture. And specifically, even though, like I said, I was first introduced to Bitcoin at the end of 2010, I wasn't, at the time, I wasn't really, it was something like, oh, that's interesting. I wasn't really just drop everything I was doing and then start to dig into it. And then it was only in 2013, I'm Andre Antonopoulos, Andre Antonopoulos. So he was originally from the Bay Area. So he lived in the Bay Area at that time. And at that time, he only had 4,000 followers on Twitter. He was unknown. And my friend of mine told me that, oh, there is this event called the Open Garden and in San Francisco, so you might want to check out. And I literally thought that this Open Garden was really creating this collaborative garden. I was thinking it's a gardening thing. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I went there. And it was about mesh network, it was nothing to do with gardening. It was the creating mesh network online. And I was like, okay, that's interesting, and I'm not sure, if I'm interested in this. But then Andrea Antonopoulos was one of the speakers at the event. And then he started to talk about Bitcoin. I knew about Bitcoin a little bit. So, okay, that's interesting. And he gave like 15 minutes speech and talking about what it does, and it reduces the remittance cost. It's cut off the middleman, and it's, and then how the Visa, MasterCard and all of those financial institutions, they are rent seekers, and then they are exploiting us and all that stuff. He packed them, in his elegant speech in 15 minutes. And then every sentence that he spoke, I was inwardly saying, yes, yes, it's like wow, it's like, and by the time he finished the speech, I was totally like orange pilled. And literally it's like the Christian, right? When they met Jesus, they dropped everything and they followed him. So it was like that, I just dropped everything. I didn't drop everything, but almost quite, yeah. And then I followed Andrea Antonopoulos, and just watched all YouTube's videos and digging. I kind of became obsessed with him, to understand Bitcoin. And then the more I understand Bitcoin, there's this moment of, oh my God, this is it. This is gonna, this kind of, yeah, it's the light bulb, right, lit, and that became, yeah, it got to the point where I was supposed to write a dissertation at the time, and my professor had to basically kind of intervene, she had to tell me that you need to start working on dissertation, writing dissertation, and you cannot be just doing something else. And so I had to kind of, discipline myself. And so I, to that degree that I got so obsessed with Bitcoin since then. And I thought that over time, it's gonna mellow down a little bit, okay, I guess I understand enough or whatever, but then it's deepened. And then especially after the pandemic started, then, the quarantine and the lockdown and everything, I just got into this so much cosmic space, Rob, and you and, Gigi, and then you guys are getting into more kind of metaphysical realm of Bitcoin. And then that gave me kind of permission to dive deeper, because initially I thought I'm going crazy. I'm losing my mind. I'm now thinking about Bitcoin in the same, thought with Jesus Christ. What I'm saying, even there's this moment, it became so clear to me, that there's this thought comes to me, and that tells me Bitcoin is the second coming of Christ. And then I ask myself, wow, that was a crazy thought, but I can't help it. And then, so looking at, how the space kind of went into this cosmic dimension, I thought, okay, it's okay for me to dive deeper. And, I'm not crazy one here, So yeah, that's kind of how everything evolved into this, starting out from more socio-political realm to, now kind of getting into the metaphysical, spiritual aspect of it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's so funny how that process takes place where, because culture is so, and you've talked about this a lot too in your writing, about how influential one culture is in our conception of ourselves and how we orient ourselves in the world, and what are the drivers or determinants of culture and how important they are to get right or make sure they're constructed on the right foundation, and then how culture changes and all of that nuance there. But just to say that it also, of course, and this is not exclusively bad, but it contains us in a certain sense. Culture, Peterson has said something akin to culture is how we kind of outsource our sanity. It's the kind of sounding board that we use to see, are we moving through it correctly? And if you have a really, really far out idea or behavior, then culture says, nope, come back in. Now, I think we would all agree today in the global culture, it's far too narrow, this kind of materialist, big government fiat culture just has a very narrow lens, and we all want to break free from that. We want to broaden it dramatically. And part of that is exploring far out ideas. And, here we are encountering something extremely novel in Bitcoin.
Yes.
And more, in private conversations, as you keep trying to dig deeper and you're seeing the correlations and the analogies and the relations between other wisdom or ideas or whatever phenomenon in the past, you know, there seems to be this convergence on this thing that it's even more meaningful and even more meaningful and even more meaningful. And you know, it's funny you say that, because you know, to say, first of all, to say something is the second coming of Jesus Christ, one, you're bumping up against the fact that most people in secular culture have completely dismissed the validity of religious narrative and myth entirely anyways. So even if you were to kind of profess a belief in that system of wisdom or understanding itself, you're kind of like, oh, you're one of those people, just move along, you know? But then to not only say that there is some kind of validity, however distorted or corrupt it's become in the original story, that perhaps we are at a point where the constituent parts that coalesce to allow that story to have such an impact, such a grip on people, maybe it's emerging in another form once again for a very similar purpose or reason. And maybe we're at a place where we need that again.
Exactly. And then, you know, when I say like the second coming of Christ, you know, I don't mean like the Christ, you know, incarnating in a physical form, but it's more like in the network, you know, like when Christ said, like when two or more are gathered, I would be there, kind of like the spirit of that. So then there is this network, you know, something that I wanted to touch on in the piece, the network Messiah. It's like the network of Bitcoin, you know, basically when we realize who we are, you know, and when we see divine in each of us, you know, that changes its faces, changes color of skin and language that we speak in every 10 minutes, you know, then we see something extraordinary about ourselves. And that, you know, and trusting that, you know, having faith in who we are collectively, you know, that we can save ourselves, you know. So that's kind of like to me, the second coming of Christ. I mean, so we are, you know, the Messiah in some ways, you know. So that's kind of like, you know, so when I say like Bitcoin is the second coming of Christ, I don't, you know, mean it as, you know, the Jesus coming back, you know.
Sure. No, I think we can all appreciate that. Yeah, no, I think we all understand what you mean by that. But my point was just to say that it takes a few initial people to say the crazy thing, and it's most likely that we're wrong, because who the hell is ever right on such deep and important matters? Like at a minimum, it's likely that we're not completely right. But if we don't allow ourselves to say the weird, bizarre, crazy thing, and then have like an honest discourse or discussion about them, then we're for sure never going to find out a deeper truth or meaning, you know. So we kind of have to do that. And you know, there's not many more crazier statements than, you know, this one. But you know, or at least but you know what's crazy is in all my conversations, you know, privately, and I've been having many of them on the podcast and in my own thinking, a lot of people are winding up in that sort of territory, and language kind of fails, right? So you have to draw from the past for analogies, but it doesn't mean they're perfect, as you just said, because you're not saying like it's the actual thing, but there's some kind of similar relationship to what's going on.
And then the fact that, you know, looking at Bitcoin as a cultural phenomenon itself, that, you know, the fact that why is it that Bitcoin engages us to think like this, you know, and be more creative and imaginative, and then start to ask questions that we don't normally, you know, ask. What is it, right? So that and it's shared by people around the world who are in Bitcoin space, and not necessarily not in the fiat system, right? So that itself is an interesting phenomenon, in my opinion, you know. And I think all the progress for us to create a future, I mean, start with the idea, start with the imagination. And if we can't freely, you know, entertain the ideas and explore the ideas, then we cannot progress as a species, right? So I think Bitcoin is stimulating us, at least, you know, we could say.
100%. You know, and I think whatever your opinion on the veracity of this sort of framing is, I think most people appreciate that Bitcoin is sufficiently mysterious, and most people are not sufficiently arrogant to say that they fully understand what Bitcoin is, that at least there's an allowance for these sorts of bizarre discussions. You know, people aren't going to just completely dismiss you, that, you know, they're going to want to see rigorous logic and rationale and reason and historical context and all that kind of stuff, because I think ultimately one of the things that Bitcoin has inspired and also in a sense drawn in is people that are questioning of the dominant narrative, and more broadly speaking, are pursuing truth, and maybe it's not even fully conscious why that is. Maybe it's been just kind of, it was subconscious for a while, and an engagement in Bitcoin is making that more explicit. Well, why do I want to discover more truth? What is the value of truth? Why do I want to bring that more into my life? Why do I want to orient myself more toward it? And these are all like questions of the greatest profundity. And it seems more and more people are willing to engage in all sorts of discussions that attempt to answer that question.
Yes, and for me, I just find that it's the kind of like a resonance, as a form of validating truth, and that when I hear like Andrea Antonopoulos spoke about Bitcoin, he didn't, I mean, in some ways, I feel like he didn't say anything that I didn't know. I mean, but I mean, he said something that I knew at the deeper level that I don't even understand with my mind, maybe something that I remember, or he sparked the ideals in my heart, and so that's why it was like I was introduced to some kind of familiar ideas, or the ideas that I cherished as a child, that it's a kind of a process of remembering, So I think that for me, Bitcoin awakens, it's more, I feel like Bitcoin awakens something that is in us, and that we only kind of start to engage with kind of an inquiry or pursuit for truth, so that our intellect can grasp it. That's kind of like how I see my relationship with Bitcoin. And obviously, that process never ends. It's not like I would fully understand. But it's that kind of something I feel at the heart level, the ideals, that it's not just an intellectual pursuit. It engages the whole entire being. It's something that excites me, something that gives me joy and love, and that this sense of spark, the sense of idealism.
Right. Well, and I think if we're going to try to identify any hallmarks of divine connection or experience, it's probably those emotions or sensations of joy, of peace, of freedom, of stimulation. And and I think this is part of the reason why people make those connections, because like, why is it that understanding and engaging this thing is giving me greater clarity, or is instilling these sorts of sensations? And like, is one of the reasons that it seems to be primarily predicated on the values of truth and freedom, and that those values in us are as fundamental as it gets. And so when we see something out in the world that resonates with similar values and helps us instantiate them further in the world, doesn't it kind of make sense that would kind of like cause us to vibrate faster with it, and connect and be more integrated, let's say, like maybe that's what it does, like grounding oneself in greater truth would seem, I think the logic there would just be, it helps you become more integrated with all the different constituent components of what you experience. Whereas maybe with a different perception, you isolate yourself off from different aspects that could be beneficially integrated, so that you could become a fuller version or a more integrated version of yourself.
Right. And I think that, something that I addressed in my, the Network the Messiah piece, was that this imbalance between the left brain and the right brain function, hemispheres, and that, our civilization or modern society more focus on the left brain development, and I think that our civilization very much is built upon the knowledge based on the head, abstract, things, and that kind of cut us off from other faculties such as emotion, instinct, and I think what Bitcoin does is Bitcoin restores our connection to instinct, restores, something maybe we know at the, not at the intellectual level, but something that we all understand as a child, or before we develop the abstract capacity, maybe, so that's why, and so that, I think that emotions are that's something that give us joy and love, that is eliminated from our society, and Bitcoin brings that back, or open up the pathway for us to embrace that aspect of ourselves, or the spirituality, maybe, that's maybe what I call our connection to the essence, or connection to, the fundamental aspect of who we are,
Yeah, exactly. And so, it kind of seems like the values represented in Bitcoin are similar to those most fundamental aspects of who we are, call them values or spirituality or
Right.
divine spark or essence or
Yes,
whatever. Like it seems
definitely.
that there's a type of coherence there. And I think the reason why it's so inspiring is because it seems to be a way for those values or that aspect of all of ourselves to be transmuted out
Right.
into the interpersonal world and begin fostering a system and a culture that is maximally imbued with those things.
Yes.
And I think, that's part of why this is so hopeful, because it's like, wow, if we can engage in a system that is, by default speaking to or extracting the most fundamental or the best aspects of us, what kind of a world might that create, and what kind of a world might that inspire us to be participants in?
Definitely. And I like the piece that you wrote recently about Bitcoin maximalism, and in that, you basically pointed out that you shared the observation that there is built-in morality in Bitcoin, and I totally agree with you. I think that there's something in this protocol that, and which I think it's the freedom, the protocol enables freedom, and the freedom as a foundation for us to develop moral choice, develop the capacity for love, moral choice. And without that freedom, it's not really possible. So that what Bitcoin does is that because Bitcoin enables freedom, it engages us to, maybe develop a sense of morality and go beyond what other species can do, like animals, they don't, they live with this, they're governed by the instincts, but humans are different, in that we are not just creatures, we could become co-creators and develop a sense of morality, and help facilitate the evolution, I think that's how I see it. So I think,
absolutely,
it's the freedom, the people like talk about freedom for the sake of freedom, I want to be free, to do whatever we want. I mean, obviously we want that too, but freedom, as a foundation for developing morality, sense of morality. And so that's, I think, the very important aspect that, Bitcoin actually engages us. And then also cypherpunks, because cypherpunks are, basically they are cryptographer with ethics. So, and that differentiate them from other computer engineers, who don't have that ethics.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's a point that is very much absent from the conversation in the culture today, as so many things are. I mean, I think the culture, the broad culture of the world has many, 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 many problems. But one of them surely is the fact that all of our actions have a moral dimension. They're informed by the morality at somewhere along the line.
Yes.
And the less freedom we are able, the less we are able to freely choose our actions, then the less we're able to exercise whatever morality we may be carrying around, and the less feedback we're able to get as a result of exercising that morality. And so, as you say, the less freedom means the less moral refinement, because you're getting less opportunities to get feedback on how that morality is taking shape in action. And when you exist in, a global fiat world where government is enormous and so many things are abdicated to that institution, we'll take care of this, we'll do that, or we'll tell you to do this or do that, then you're increasingly removed from the ability to engage in moral refinement, because you're increasingly limited in your capacity or your allowability, or how much you're allowed to make your own free choices. And so in a world where more free choice, where free choices are brought back to the individual, where the individual now has the responsibility and the capacity to make almost all of their choices via their own free will, then we get into a situation where you're kind of hypercharging moral refinement. You're saying, oh, now every single action you take with the morality imbued in it, you're getting feedback constantly on it. And of course, for even for those that aren't actively engaged in that don't want it, they're going to get it by default. But for those that are actively engaged in it, that want to engage in that process of more refinement, they're going to be able to do so in a manner that's, basically never been experienced before.
Exactly. And then, when I look at the fiat system and the underlying, the basis of the fiat system was, it's the denial of free will, denial of freedom, basically. And I talked about this a bit on Rob's show, but it's the B.F. Skinner, for instance, the behaviorist such as B.F. Skinner, he believes that, we are not free. Like we don't, the free will is basically illusion, and that he reduced the human motives to the very much kind of a simplistic animal, like it's the pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain, right? And we are much more than that, the animals, they work with the pleasure principle, like they pursue, they seek for pleasure and they avoid pain, obviously. But humans, yes, of course we do seek for pleasure, but we ask ourselves questions, is this right things to do, right? Eventually, like some of us start asking questions, is this right for me to do? So that, because me pursuing for pleasure will come to conflict with another human beings, the pursuit for pleasure. And then, so if, my pursuit of pleasure create harm, I have to find a way to restrain my action, right? So that's kind of bring us to the moral dimension for humankind. And then Skinner, obviously, like he wanted to basically, by denying free will and reducing human motives into this kind of simplistic thing, he basically wanted to create this perfect system where the question of freedom never arises, And for him, he said that under a perfect system, no one have to have goodness. No one have to develop goodness because you cannot even commit crimes. He wanted to build a system that everything is controlled, that you don't have a choice. You can only do good, what the system tells you to be the behavior. Then we don't have to think about crimes. We don't have to think about evil deed or anything because we are perfect, right? So that's the vision of the behaviorist vision of the world. And that's in many ways, I think, incorporated in a fiat system, and now it's going to accelerate more with AI and transhumanism agenda, et cetera. But what Bitcoin does is that Bitcoin basically saying, no, we have choices, we have freedom, and freedom is a part of what defines us, and out of which we will create a system that the individual become ethical out of their own free engagement, and then create value of moral value. And so that's an interesting thing. And so it's again, for me, I feel like it's at the essence of it, it's the question surrounding human nature, and this debate around nature versus nurture, and some say like the Darwinian assertion, it's that we humans are, there's no essence, we are basically the outcome, byproduct of random evolutionary process, and that we are constantly changing to the adjusting ourselves to the environment that changes. So then there isn't something essential or a fixed aspect of ourselves. Whereas the Greek philosopher like Aristotle, he believes that this eternity, something eternal in us, something unchangeable, so that gives a different view, right? And then even though he believes that Aristotle, for instance, he believes that there is something eternal, something unchangeable that makes us be unique as a species, but virtue could be built on our engagement. So it's not like we could be just being guided by instinct and do nothing, but we have to engage with it to create moral value. So that the debate about whether we have something essential in us or we don't, that creates more kind of the system that like a behaviorist view of the world, like trying to control things and try to focus on the culture aspect, right? Changing the environment, controlling things, and then guide human beings to act in a certain way. Or if you believe in there's something innate in us, then there have to be a balance between nature versus nurture, And then, you know, I look at human nature like a hardware, like in some ways, that there's this hardware, right? And then if we build the software on it that is not compatible with hardware, the software get corrupted. You know, software doesn't serve for us. And then, so that's, I think the fiat culture is basically its software is corrupted because it's not aligned with the underlying principle of natural law. And the Bitcoin is the new software, you know, the cypherpunks write the code in alignment with, you know, fundamentals of human nature, something that is fixed, you know, and make it immutable in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting and apt framing. You know, it also makes me think that, you know, another way of looking at this is simply, you know, or dependent upon your way of looking at this, you'll either think a top-down approach at managing people and culture and civilization is most appropriate, versus if you think about it in a different way, in the non-behavioralist way, you'll think a bottom-up emergent approach to things is the best way to go about things. And, you know, I've thought about this issue a lot too. And, you know, I think this is another way to link back to what we opened with, was the relation to Christ, because I mean, just think about how we're framing this right now. We're suggesting that an ideal has emerged, which as a result of our using it and in relation to it, we're able to refine and discover a greater quote unquote morality, or a greater way of being for ourselves as individuals, and how profound and transformative and valuable that can be. I mean, I know there's many different interpretations of religious story, but let's just say one of them is that you look at the mythological hero of any religious or mythological narrative, and that's kind of their function too. They are there as an ideal so that you can refine yourself in relation to it. It provides you with an ability to orient yourself and move toward a more moral or integrated direction. And so, you know, both of those things seem to be doing it in the same way. And the refrain that I always have for the staunch materialists is and the behavioralists and I guess the people that you just referred to, it's like they'll go all the way and say, yeah, sure, you know, like we observe our action, we determine which ones are conducive to harmonious relationships and fulfillment and happiness and stuff, and then we reflect back on it, and we that's how we determine what's right or wrong. Right. And you know, basically I'll say, yeah, and that's what these you know, all of these systems of myth and religion have done as well. The only difference is as you know, like the difference is, do you think we exist in a perfect vacuum? Like, is that where human consciousness is floating? Or are there parameters, unseen parameters that we're interacting with? You know, because I think you have to ask the question, why is it that acting with certain values or morals or certain behaviors are less conducive or more conducive to harmony and joy and happiness and peace and all the things that we mutually agree are good? Why? And I think the religions are just saying, because somehow those behaviors and those values cohere with something about this non-vacuum that we're in. Whereas I think the hardcore materialists fail to appreciate why it is certain behaviors are conducive to results that they would deem good. You know, they just, well, who knows why? It's just, you know, that just is the case. Yeah. And that seems like the major distinction.
But for me, I just see that there is an inherent morality in nature, that there is this nature brings harmony. You know, if you look at the natural kingdom, for instance, you know, everything is there is certain kind of a harmony created, you know, and even though like, from our perspective, it's not, you know, but nature has like all the forces, like destruction, creation, aggression, competition, and collaboration, all the kind of contradictory, paradoxical forces, you know, using these kind of contradictory forces and somehow attained perfect balance, right? And that's the wisdom, or that's I think the genius that nature does. And I think the humans, I think our rational mind, that we wanted to control, we wanted to build the moral system that you know, makes us feel right, you know, and German philosopher like Immanuel Kant, you know, Kantian ethics, that's what is referred to often, is that his idea of morality was that morality cannot be built on natural desires, natural impulses. You have to go against it. And then morality is something that can be only dictated by reason, and I think that led to the kind of Protestantism, that tried to kind of suppress natural impulses, and then again, Aristotle, I again go back to Aristotle of what he said about morality is that for him, he believes that morality is built upon what nature provides us, and there is no conflict between what is pleasurable and what is right. And I think that's the thing that our mind kind of creates duality, right? What is good, what is bad, what is right and wrong. So that's a kind of like a part of the process that we have to engage. But when we engage in what is right, then obviously I am not doing what is wrong or whatever the polarity is defined. And nowadays in a centralized system, it's the authority on the top of the system that they are the one who decide what is good and wrong, which has nothing to do with morality, which is just the arbitrarily created set of values, that what they think is right, and which might not be right for me, right? I mean, it's individual basis. I think you cannot just top down like authoritarian style apply what is right, the kind of rules for everyone, that might not work. I think so. I think it's the question of how can each person act freely and somehow act ethically at the same time, somehow can come to kind of a consensus, right? Consensus about something. Because let's say I want to do something, but I'm choosing to enter into Bitcoin network and choosing to, to follow network rules, and that's my choice, And by choosing these rules out of my own voluntary, choice, I am, choosing to be held accountable by the network of peers, and that creates kind of, I think, and in each 10 minutes when the transaction is settled, that basically shows that it's a confirmation that rules have not been broken, that we all acted ethically, we acted morally. I mean, in terms of nobody broke rules, right? And nobody didn't cheat. It just confirms that we somehow come to agreement, synchronization, and that's that's I think for me the embodiment of each individual somehow acting morally, and you know what I mean. It's kind of like magical things that happens, and I never seen anything like that before in my life, and it's done without enforcing any top-down rules, and nobody's told like you shall obey these commands, these rules. Nobody, everybody's acting freely. So that's the magic. And
I think this very much lines up with what we've been discussing, which is I don't think that would work so well if the rules to which you were agreeing weren't maximally aligned to natural law or inherent values of how the world or the universe or what have you. And because I think part of to do what you said, like we have to subject ourselves to some limitations in order to cooperate with others and to get along and to create that harmony. I mean, harmony is not just free for all. Harmony is each acting within certain limitations that allows for, let's say, maximum flourishing of the system. And I think the reason why Bitcoin works is because people are agreeing to certain limitations, but those limitations allow them to cohere to natural law or fundamental values. And the same is true. And again, as corrupt as it may have become, religion imposes many limitations on people. Most religions have a framework of like, these are the bounds you should stay within. And I think the reason why they were so sticky, at least some of them, was because those bounds actually helped people cohere to what was real, the natural law or the natural unfolding of how things work. Now, of course, man in the middle corrupts things, institutionalized, like we know the story. And this is why Bitcoin, I think we would agree, and many people agree, is perhaps an upgrade to that, because it makes it more tangible. It makes it less difficult to violate. It makes it easier to verify that other people are playing by the same rules. But I still think the reason why both of them have achieved or had achieved some success is because you need to impose limitation on yourself. That's a guarantee. But which limitations are you going to impose? And both of these systems said, hey, these seem to be like the limitations that allow you to cohere most to the natural law that would facilitate the most cooperative harmony. And the same is true for something like, the Constitution in the US. Like that document has the same purpose. Which limitations are going to allow us to maximize our flourishing?
And that limitation we are willing to accept. You see, it's the out of freedom. So that's another important point, right? So the question is that why is it that we accept that limitation, right? What is it that why Bitcoiners are willing to be abided, by this consensus rules and accept the limitation? What is the trade-off, right? And for me, the trade-off again is that we want to be a part of network. We want to, relate to another human being. We want to, interact with others. And I think that maybe, we want to produce value of love, and maybe that's the highest value that we as, human species can produce, and that there is the call to love, or, the build on freedom. And for that, we are willing to accept that limitation, right? It's kind of like surrendering, it's something like we are surrendering. I don't want to be religious here, but we are kind of surrendering ourselves to the protocol, right? And that the Christ, the Christ, the last word, on the cross that he said, Father, why have you forsaken me? In your arms I commend my spirit, right? So in that, in that moment of surrendering, it was him. He basically he claimed the source of legitimacy, source of authority, and he is, nobody is making Jesus to surrender. He is the one who became the issuer of his action. He's commanding, right? Commanding his spirit to, surrender to Christ, basically, to God. So that's kind of like, I think Bitcoin allow us to become individually sovereign, and that we become the authority, of that generate our action, that we create a command, we issue the command for our own action, and then in that action, that we would basically surrender ourselves to the network, protocol, and accept that this consensus, and accept the limitation. I know it's kind of too religious, but yeah.
We're deep in there already. Don't worry about it.
People think.
No, but I think that's correct, right? And which is why, subordinating yourself to a set of limitations or a set of rules is no small thing. You should do it with great consideration, because you are kind of dictating, well, what rules am I going to be bound by, and what what am I going to play within, and what system am I going to use to extract and express value? And to your point about we've discussed already how free will is necessary for moral refinement, making moral choices that are of your own volition. But I also think that the other side of that coin is limitation, because if you weren't limited, if you weren't giving up anything when you're taking any action, then there's no cost to your action, and there's no way of determining whether whether it was good or bad or what. So limitation places a cost on your action such that it's incentivizes or a necessity to determine whether or not that action was good or bad, right or wrong, moral or not. And I think you, as we discussed, you partly answer that by how much it coheres to natural law or the way things work. And that allows you to then move through those limitations more efficiently. But toward expressing the highest values, but without that necessity to give something up, you don't you don't have
that's
choice.
The thing that it's I see the spiritual people or awakened people, so to speak, they tend to kind of more focus on transcending experience, like we're transcending the body or transcending personality and then ego identification and all of that, and then we are all one, like some people are into that, right? Meditating and sitting and then just, I am everybody or something like that,
Yeah, we all know some of those
we are all
people.
one, But I think that it's again, it's the limitation that you talk about. I think that personality is important, individuality is important. And me, of course, I'm a human being foremost, but I am Japanese, I am woman, that there is certain concreteness, specificity, that there is something that makes me different, right? And then one could say, like me being Japanese, this biological foundation, the biological experience is limited, right? Like I cannot be like, transgender, or I cannot be like transrace or whatever, or I cannot just exist as a human being. But that concreteness, me being Japanese, me being a woman, kind of enriches me, ground me in this physical domain in a way that allow me to have kind of experience that I would not have had otherwise, right? If I were transcending or, not kind of grounded in my body. So I think Bitcoin, what Bitcoin does is it's kind of anchors, I think, or make a bridge between the spiritual realm and the physical realm, and creating the limitation that it allow us to, like there's this expression, like, we are in the world, but not of it, right? That, but it allow me to kind of to play a certain role, in a much more conscious way and meaningful way, accepting the limitation, and in order to, fully experience my life. And it's if you know what I mean, it's like the love, like if you love someone or if you love humanity, right? It's one thing to love humanity and then loving everybody, like, oh, I love everybody and then I'm not in a relationship with anyone because I love humanity or something like that. But there is some, profound experience, richness come from, being committed to one person, for instance, and get to know the person at the deep level, So and one could say that's limiting, that. But it's not, you see. So it's kind of like a Bitcoin. Yeah, Bitcoin really, I think that you made a good point that this limitation is an important part, and that ground us in the physical domain, because we are physical beings. That we don't transcend, we don't go any like up in the space or whatever, we have to be on the earth, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think. Maybe broadly speaking, you could just say if you weren't forced into the limitations that are inherent in individuality, would the power, I mean, how much would you value the power of being able to seek unity or love or whatever you want to call it? Like, would you be able to experience it? I mean, likely not, because there's no counter reference point, so maybe, and this is,
and it's said
this has been said by many people, but maybe that's the gift.
If you are not grounded in the physical realm, you don't have consequence. Like, it's you don't get pain,
right?
You don't get hurt. I mean, it's just like you're dissociated, kind of, But the values of wisdom is created through us actually having to experience the physical world. The having to have a full human experience, and that requires us to, place ourselves in the intimate relationship with the world. And I think, Bitcoin, for instance, if you don't secure your Bitcoin in a proper manner, then you lose fund and you get hurt, or there are consequences that are visible in this physical realm, you see, and nobody can deny that. So that comes from limit, right?
Yeah, and I think this is also how your morality, whether it's conscious or subconscious, informs and expresses your decisions around value too, because basically what you're saying when you act and when you value things is, here's what I'm willing to give up, here's what I'm willing to sacrifice of myself in order to get something in return that by definition I'm valuing more than what I'm giving up, because that's why the action is taking place. And this allows us to see, like, well, what is being sacrificed to? And as a result, like, what what is the thing that's most sacrificed to, or to use a little bit less dramatic language, what is the thing that the most people are deciding is most worthy of giving their limited resources in order to obtain or experience or welcome into their life. And again, I think if you play those cards out far enough, you wind up again in religious and deeply philosophical domains, because it's like, well, what is the most valuable thing? Well, it's the thing that most people give the most of themselves up for.
Right.
Is it love? Maybe in certain people, in certain circumstances. Is it material wealth? In our world today, maybe the answer is yes for a lot of people. Which one is better? Well, certain traditions would say the former. Modern society might say the latter. You know, so and this is what I'm really enthusiastic about Bitcoin about, is because now those actions, those expressions of value, those sacrifices, or those giving of ourselves to get something of greater value in return, all of that will be able to be done with no noise in the signal. So like we'll be able to pristinely express those value judgments, and we'll be able to both construct and see in terms of reflecting back on us what is ascending as the things of highest value. And I think, you know, if I can be so bold as to say, what I'm initially witnessing in the extremely nascent still Bitcoin culture is that the things that are being valued the most are not material wealth, are not power, are not things like that. It's things like family and honesty and freedom and these moral fundamentals that we've been talking about. And so what happens if that trend continues and we end up in a world where those values are the most ascendant? Those become the things of highest value. I mean, and I'm pretty excited about the prospect of that, you know?
Definitely. And then it's the free market deciding, you know what I mean? It's not the top-down authority telling, you know, create a hierarchical values, but it's you know, the network through consensus deciding what are valuable, you know? And so that's kind of exciting part. But another part is that I think, you know, everybody is, you know, at the different stage of moral development, right? So, you know, we tend to kind of think that everybody is the same, you know, but developmentally, I think each person is in a different stage. And then it could be like somebody who is young, like, you know, could be like, you know, 10 years old, who already kind of have capacity for compassion and love that maybe 70-year-old don't have, you know? So it's not just based on the physical age, but you know, I believe that each has soul and, you know, and that brings certain kind of development, gift and talent and things. So what Bitcoin allows is that it allows everyone to, you know, freely explore, you know, really, I think engage in the path of developing conscience or moral choice, you know, and what that looked like is different for each person. So somebody, I think that, you know, for some people, accumulating wealth, you know, it's something that gives them pleasure. And that's okay, you know, that's where they are at, you know, and then by doing that, you know, maybe investing into Bitcoin, they're actually delivering value for other people. And that's their way of acting morally, you know, acting ethically, you know, and whereas maybe other people are more kind of coming from the spiritual background, and then they have kind of certain intentions, like wanted to use Bitcoin for charity, or, you know, they are not into kind of making money, you know, and so they are like at the different stage of morality, you know, moral development. And what's amazing about Bitcoin is that it's basically allows everyone to act freely, and then, you know, pursue or not pursue, right, the path for moral development. And it's okay that if you don't want to develop morality, it's, you know, you don't have to. But, you know, those who want to, you know, they could do it too. So I think you know, we often talk about Bitcoin, how Bitcoin separate state, you know, money between money and the state, right? Create a wall between money and state. But I think that what Bitcoin does is that it's really kind of, it enables religious freedom. The first time that you know, in human history, in some degree, you know, and including you know, our choice not to worship God, or, you know, that is part of the religious freedom. And so, yeah, so that's a kind of exciting thing. And then, you know, and we would see what would emerge out of it, out of this free market, you know, process of, determining values or whatever, and then we could maybe later on, like we will realize, like you said, the family, or relationship, or love. I mean, these are the things that maybe human beings appreciate or not, right? We will find out.
Yeah.
It's like human
Sure.
experiment, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was definitely not suggesting that pursuing wealth is in any way
Right.
bad. It's just, as you say, I mean, what's exciting is just that right now we have this behemoth or this leviathan that is co-opting the signal of these value expressions,
exactly.
and it's able to inject its values and its ideologies and its interests into that system and distort it, and all sorts of things. When we have a system where that's not possible, I just can't wait to see what does become the thing of greatest value. Like maybe my orientation right now thinks, because me personally is like, well, what do I value more? Like a nice car in the driveway, or do I value like a trusting friendship or a good relationship or a beautiful time in nature, whatever it is, like, of course, we're all going to make different decisions there. But as you say, in a system like that, over time, the free market will say which ones are most collectively valued over other ones. And, maybe it will be, starships in the, in space, but maybe it'll be, maybe we'll come to appreciate and value these things that we've been discussing so much more that will dial down our material pursuits collectively and how much we value them. And maybe we'll dial up our conscious or personal or spiritual, for lack of a better term, pursuits. And for the very reason, because we will value them more, not because we think it's good or anything like that, but because yeah, exactly. I feel more wealthy when I have those things versus, the material things.
And that kind of, I think, proves that, I mean, it's what is natural or what is innate in us, I think, that maybe, or what it means to be human being, what defines, our species perhaps. And maybe the creator or God, observing us and looking at the blockchain, Bitcoin blockchain, and think that, okay, what would humanity choose? We want to see what values that they are going to choose, and maybe we are just a part of this big experiment, right? But I think that now in the fiat system, basically, because it's controlled, and it suppresses our natural desire and what is innately in us. That's why we have complete kind of the inverted kind of value system that we engage in destruction and aggression and war and things like that, which I think majority of us don't want. That the system, that this political system does not represent the will of the populace, right? So that's why what we are seeing is, I don't think what we are seeing really defines what it means, who we are, and then up till now, up till the invention of Bitcoin, we didn't have a say. Like, we couldn't do anything. Like, we would be like, oh God, I didn't agree to be a part of this world. I don't like our species. I don't like humanity, who is engaged in aggression and killing other people. But I'm powerless. I don't think I can do anything. And now Bitcoin provides a tool for us to really define, what it means to be human, and show the world that, yeah, we care. We want these kind of values. And this is who we are, the species,
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think the point basically is that now everyone will be able to express value and the morality that's nestled within that with equal fidelity. Not with equal scale, because people will be richer and poorer and all that kind of stuff, but their signal will receive the same treatment, to be as pristine from one person to the next. And again, we've touched on culture a little bit already, but one of the things about culture is that it arises because it's useful. Now it can be co-opted, and it can be very corruptive of the individual, because it will be creating an environment that's sending them, let's say, untrue, and as a result, unhealthy signals. And then they'll be using those signals to construct who they are and to orient themselves. And then they would do so poorly if those signals were untrue. But in this system, ideally speaking, and I I recognize we're speaking ideally here, that signal will be true. And as a result, the culture that emerges around it, I think will be far more reliable in being that environment or sounding board, which
Yes.
we're able to constantly feedback with to try to orient ourselves. And, you know, again, like my perspective on all this in terms of what I quote unquote value will most likely change over the next 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, we all have to appreciate, as kind of divergent as many of us Bitcoiners are and were even before Bitcoin, we came up in a culture and an environment and a system of exclusively predicated on those signals, you know. And so it's not to say that we didn't have, you know, beautiful, joyous, loving experiences, but that process of, you know, that eternal process of feedback between us and environment, we were using signals that were either untrue or distorted or suboptimal in some way.
Right.
And so and this is part of the kind of cleansing of perception that a lot of people are referred to when they say they've been orange pilled. But I don't think that process is finished. So, you know, we will likely have different views in the years to come. And so I'm just excited that the environment that I'll be engaging with and probing for better feedback in order to orient myself is going to give me higher quality, higher fidelity information. And who knows what I'll value then, because I'm going to be relying on the culture quite a bit to determine that. But I'm because of its coherence with truth, like we already discussed, because the rules that we've agreed to limit ourselves by presumably are maximally coherent with natural law or something grander than what we can conceive. Presumably it's going to give you very good and very true feedback, and we'll discover something that we've never discovered before.
And I think
in
that
terms of values,
that this distorted signal that you pointed out, that we, you know, when we are deeply steeped in the fiat system, we didn't even know that that we are getting signals, and we were not able to even examine what they are, or like even judge, okay, whether that is, you know, good signal, or, you know, whether that is aligned with, you know, what we feel inside of us. You know, we just were affected by that. We didn't have, you know, any kind of a way we didn't have space to engage with that, right? And now Bitcoin brings a new signal, and then we started to hear something different, like tuning to different song, you know, so to speak, and you know, and then be able to compare. These are two different song or vibration, you know, and then maybe I could choose to go into this network instead of that. So that, I think that, and then so, you know, once we are orange pilled, we go into this deep, you know, rabbit hole, and one of the characteristics of rabbit hole obviously engages us with the process of purification, you know, and that's like a religious spiritual thing, right? Like we are being purified. And I mean, that's why I think it's a kind of a spiritual process, because like we are detoxing basically, right? All of those beliefs and values that we unconsciously adapted, incorporated into ourselves, and then be able to actually literally see, wow, you know, I was having this belief. Wow, this is so bad. You know, I was eating like this or doing that. And, you know, and then this low time preference, you know, that Bitcoin allows us to have, you know, lower time preference, and then be able to kind of think in the long term and appreciate, you know, the things that, you know, the relationship or spending time in nature, or the things that we, you know, didn't appreciate before, maybe, you know, in the fiat system. So yeah, so I think that this is what is happening is, we are kind of collectively, I think humankind collectively going through some kind of a rite of passage, you know, to emerge as a new species or whatever, you know, and that we are certainly, I think that this materialistic culture of the fiat system obviously is crumbling, you know, it's not doing well, you know, and then there is at the same time there's a new culture bubbling up from Bitcoin, you know, and we are here to, I mean, I feel very fortunate that I'm able to witness this moment, you know, in history. And so I'm just so grateful every day, you know.
Oh, me too. It's amazing.
Yes.
And, you know, I think, as you say, I mean, many of us look back on our quote unquote fiat selves and we're like,
right,
you know, like we're critical. And again, even many of us were, you know, very critical of the fiat system itself, but there's still, at least until you kind of have a bit of a wake up moment, that like, it just, you take it as the truth. You take the way things are as true. And when you are introduced to an alternative way of things being,
Right.
because like when you think something is true, you almost can't help but use it as that feedback mechanism to help orient yourself, because you're
Right.
like, well, this is the environment, this is the
Yes.
circumstance, this is the
Right.
game I'm playing. And then you realize that there's an alternative. And for me, even before Bitcoin, I kind of I was very critical of a lot of stuff, and I realized the pervasiveness and insidiousness of conditioning. And I was like, okay, well, like, how do I decondition myself from all this stuff that I'm critical of?
Right.
And that's an interesting process in itself, because like, well, who are you absent all conditioning?
Right.
And I think maybe that question is answered in the mystical experience, for example. It's like, oh, fundamentally, absent all of my differentiating notions, I'm the same as everybody else. But that's not how you interact in day-to-day life, which is why people don't walk around having mystical experiences. But I think it can be useful to realize that you're not actually your conditioning, and you're not actually your identity. But then you come back into your ego self, and that's what you use to interact in the world. And so then the question becomes, well, what tethers to identity do I want? What that serve me?
Right.
Like, what conditioning, or what conditioning do I want to keep? What conditioning do I want to lose or drop? And but it's a tricky question, because once you do away with all these preconceived notions and assumptions and all that kind of stuff that you've been fed throughout your life, and you sift through it all, and you're like, okay, that one seems legit. Oh, that's totally not legit.
Right.
Like, who are you absent the conditioning? And I think this is the process of building back up your conception of yourself, based on more intentionally, and hopefully with more truthful information, with more truthful signals from your environment.
Right. And then I think about, I've been thinking about the same thing for a long time, and I just think that it's a if I use the analogy of play, so we are in play, acting, performing, and directed by someone, right? And in the fiat system, central banks and the political leaders, or whoever write the script, and they use the economic forces, economic incentives to direct us, right? So then I would be kind of placed in a certain character based on like with the identity politics, I'm Japanese or that, so then I'm cast a certain role maybe, and I'm constantly identifying myself with the role and acting, right? And somehow everybody kind of, the actors and actresses, they, unlike the real play, in real play, we know that we're acting. We're on the stage acting, right? So then when the director said, all right, cut, stop, then we just get out of the role and then, go on with our life. But the difference is that we don't even know that we are acting. So that's, I think, that the situation, what's happening in the fiat system. And then once, somehow like the new signal comes out with Bitcoin, and then we started to kind of, wake up one by one. I think that people started to wake up from the play, and then, wait a second, like I've been playing this role, and who am I? Started to ask a question, who am I? I'm not this role, and I don't want to, play this anymore. And who is directing this story anyway? I don't agree with where things are going, right? And then you start to see who is basically outside of the play, not orchestrating the whole thing. And then you realize that you have this freedom to walk away from it, walk out of the play. And then I think, as a part of the Bitcoin rabbit hole process, you kind of check out from the play, and then you kind of disappeared from the stage, and people wondering where you went, and then you are physically examining what's happening and then what you are doing. And then thank God, you are able to be kind of in an isolated space and do this, right? But I think there comes time that we realize that, there was this role that I was playing, or ego identification personality that I was in, that there is a value in that. I left there. I left the people that I was playing, the other actors and, whoever that just happened to come to be a part of my life, with destiny or whatever, that I have connection with them, and I honor my connection with them. And I want to go back to the play. It's like the Neo going back to deciding to go back to the matrix to save Morpheus, in the sense that I want to go back to the play. I want to go back and enter into Nozomi Hayase, this Japanese woman. And then I want to, become an active agent, not being asleep and being directed, but I want to direct myself and somehow find a way to, help, the story to unfold in a way that is maybe I think to be good, whatever that looks like. So then there is, I think, I'm just speaking from my personal experience, and it's not, maybe some people don't feel this way, but I personally feel like I want to go back to the re-enter into the stage and then reclaim my role. And at this time, I'm going to direct myself, and then when I'm doing it, I see other people, other Bitcoiners doing that same thing. Then it's like, okay, and I could recognize them, that they are awake in a play. And then maybe I can collaborate with them and then start to have a new game, start to have a new story, and then maybe, eventually people are gonna wake up. The hyper Bitcoinization make it that, all of a sudden, like, people wake up and, oh my gosh, we are playing this role, or whatever,
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a, that whatever I left behind, the personality, the story, because when I exit from the play, my experience, my skills, the identity, everything just remain. It's almost like that, I was able to see myself outside of myself, and then that there's a value in that the value in the creation of the personality, who is functional, who has been acting, and thought that life is all kind of take life too seriously and didn't know that you are just acting, or being a part of the play. And then to decide to go back to it, I don't know if that makes sense, but and then use the whatever I obtained through the process, skills, experience, use it in service of humanity, basically. So that's, I personally think that I am like choosing to do, so, I'm aware of certain, strengths I have and skills and, what I learned, and I wanted to use them for better, I think, to help other people, I guess. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I totally understand. I mean, again, this is very consistent with like archetypal story, right? The hero returns, the prodigal son returns, you go back down into the cave. I mean, and I think this is also why courage is so often a virtue, because as you said a few minutes ago, when you first strip yourself down, when you realize that you're being directed and you have all this conditioning and you have a sense that relieving yourself of it would be ultimately positive, but the interim period there is you're naked for a bit. You're like, all those things that you formerly used to derive comfort and security have been taken away. And that's why courage is so important, because you have to have the courage to stay the course and pursue what you believe to be most true, and say, all that stuff that I'm using to be comfortable and secure, I'm going to have to let it go, because I think there's something better on the other side. And then you go through that hero's journey, you come out the other end. And I think the final action of the hero is to return, right? He's to return and try to, and it's tricky there, right? Because it's so much in society today, people presume to know what is right or wrong or good or bad or whatever, and then they impose it on people. Like, oh, I know what's right about this issue, so you should do it this way, or you should do it that way. So the real finesse and the real wisdom of the hero, or a well-integrated individual, or whatever you want to call it, is figuring out how to, I think, be exemplars of their philosophy and communicate it through, action rather than dictation, right? Because that's fiat, right? Fiat is do what I say. This is the truth.
Exactly.
Versus reintegrating in a more, in a transformed way, in a more embodied way.
Many people who had the spiritual experience, or who woke up to the fact that, within the play, woke up and that they're acting. That many, some people actually, when they go back to the play, they start religion, they start to kind of teach other people, right? And so that's, again, it's kind of like they develop kind of a spiritual ego. and then that they think that they are awake, but they fell back to actually back to the prey, in some ways, So I
Just
like
another
what you're
comfort.
saying, that it's just a, you have to, I think that when we come back to the prey, that we have to be the one, I personally think that kind of sending signals, not so much like telling or dictating other people what to do, but it's just becoming a living model, so that other people can recognize. And that's, I think, what Bitcoiners are doing. Bitcoiners are the
Although they can at times be pretty vocal, but
yeah,
I agree.
because, I mean, their presence, like that, there's something about them, right? They're exciting. They have so much joy, and they're authentic, right? So then, I mean, I think the Bitcoiners are the best advertisement for Bitcoin, because all you have to do is just see Bitcoiners, right? Then, wow, there's something different about about them, and I want to know what makes them be so vibrant, So yeah, so I think it's a little bit, they are sending out signal, So it's not about like becoming a missionary and then talk about what Bitcoin would do and things like that, but it's just the embody, right? It's just yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think as we progress here, less and less people will like understand the monetary and economic case, and they'll
Right.
just look at this emerging counterculture and contrast it with the
Right,
dominant
exactly.
culture and be like, that looks like a way better time. Those people are
Yes,
invigorated,
right.
and they're engaging in meaningful
Yes,
action, and they're having
exactly.
fun, and they're trusting relationships and all that kind of stuff. And they're like,
Right.
I'd rather be there than this dumpster fire happening over
Exactly.
here.
Right.
So
And
whatever it takes, I got to hold my own keys or plug in a node, like whatever, I'll do it,
exactly.
just so
And
I can be a
I mean,
part of
the
it.
Fed system is now, completely turning into this clown world, with this pandemic and that, the mass psychosis, right? That people, just totally cut off from reality or whatever, But it's and then like, part of me, I kind of wanted to kind of give them information like, hey, you might want to check this out, that maybe this is not right or whatever. But then I realized, no, that they would realize that if they look around and then they would see, they would find the signal, they would come our way, So it's not about kind of persuading or, try to change somebody's
No,
mind.
totally. I mean, I rewatched Rob and Jordan Peterson from the Miami discussion a couple days ago. And Jordan has talked about this quite a bit in terms of like the ways in which human beings use mimicry, right? And usually, like you use mimicry in relation to people that you admire or that have attained or achieved or
Right.
obtained things that
Yes.
you value, because you're like, oh, well, they have something I want. I need to act like them to get it, or at least it's a good theory or a hypothesis. And I think that's kind of the way to go here. It's like, no, most people aren't very persuasive, and most people aren't that receptive to intentional persuasion.
Right.
But if people look out on the world and like, that guy or girl has something that I really value or admire or want, what are they doing to get it? Then it kind of happens by itself, So,
Right. Yeah.
I think that's what many of us are coming to appreciate, not least because, it's exhausting trying to convince everyone that your way of thinking is right.
The story of the North Wind and Sun, when they were competing to have the travelers to remove remove his clothes,
Who?
the North Wind and the Sun. It's a story. It's a children's story. The North Wind and the Sun. They were looking down this traveler, who had a heavy jacket, and then they both said, okay, so let's just play this game, whoever first, successfully have him remove his jacket is going to win, right? And then the wind, obviously, just blew the cold air and, and then traveler just held the jacket so tight, and then he was resisting, right? And all that's what Sun did, Sun was just, shining and bringing warmth, and then the traveler out of himself, he just removed the jacket, so Sun won, So it's a little bit like that, you use force or coercion to, make someone do something, or you just, simply open somebody's heart, and inviting, other person to, opened their eyes. I think, that's the difference between the two, right? I mean, it's yeah, I mean, the fiat system works with coercion and force. It's based on the command system, whereas Bitcoin is Bitcoin is kind of like more like a prayer. The prayer is the difference between the prayer is inviting, right? I mean, when I think about the meaning of prayer, it does not make other people do something, right? If you pray for someone, it's not coercion, it's not forcing, right? You wish someone to do something, right? So so in a sense, I think Bitcoin is just Satoshi sent us prayer for us to inviting us to change ourselves. It's not the commandment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is kind of a personal question, so you don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but has Bitcoin and engaging it and understanding it kind of changed your perspective or behavior? I mean, we've been discussing this, but I'm just kind of curious if there's like specifics of how it's
my behavior
reoriented you. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I mean, obviously it has changed. I mean, I think Bitcoin made me be authentic, basically. And I was very much conditioned, and I mean, everything. I mean, even, yeah, I was conditioned, obviously, culturally conditioned. And also, it actually even changed the way I relate to English language. I worked so hard, I worked so hard to basically do what I do. And when I first started writing, I did it because I care about the issues. And I was initially kind of, I engaged in journalistic activities, try to educate public about what WikiLeaks is and what it does, and then counteract the misinformation of the mainstream media that try to depict WikiLeaks as a demonized, evil organization, And then so that kind of made me kind of, start writing, right? And then I initially didn't think that I would become a writer. Like obviously English is my second language, and then I like, oh gosh, and I would never become a writer, as a using English as a second language, and I think that I wasn't, obviously, as you can see, like English is my foreign language. I never felt, what's the word? Home, it's my second tongue, it's second. So I was kind of uncomfortable. There was this awkwardness, discomfort, or feel like I'm not truly who I am or whatever, And then somehow I think engaging with Bitcoin allowed me to develop my unique relationship to English language. And that I'm now able to say, I write, and, of course, that there are lots of grammatical errors that I need English, native English speakers to proofread, and then, but that's okay, that's who I am. And that's just, I do have unique relationship to this language that no other person have. And it's okay, So I think that acceptance, I think the Bitcoin helped me to accept myself as who I am. And that's, it's just the Bitcoiners, the people in this network, that how they receive my work, how they relate to me, and that they, like Max Kaiser and Stacey Harvard, for instance, they, I think believed in me, like they felt there's something in me that is unique, and that, they don't care whether I speak English as a second language or not. They invite me to, be on their show, for instance, and have interviews with me, or, they promote my work. And in that I felt like, wow, I was like before, like was not comfortable, or I was not, maybe not secure, about the way I speak, maybe, or the way I write. And I always felt like I'm not good enough. I can't, speak like native English speakers, or I cannot write like them. And, I have to work so hard, but in a sense that Bitcoiners or, the Max and Stacy, that made me realize, wow, they do not care. They don't care, how I speak how I speak English. What they care is who I am. They want to know what I think. They want to know, they want to know ideas that I have. And so that was a realization. It's like, and then, wow, they don't really care, why was I so concerned about this? Maybe I should just speak freely. And then, of course, that, this conditioning come from also me being in academia and, needing to write papers that are without any grammatical errors and, perfect. And I was conditioned, to be very judgmental about my work. And in some ways that, I kind of felt like, it's kind of like, why am I doing this in English language? Like, it's like, did I make a wrong choice or whatever? It would be so much easier if I could do this in Japanese or something, so that I kind of like, they conditioned that kind of academic training and judgment, the society put on me, I guess, and to be able to claim my own voice, and okay, they really don't care, they care about the content of my character, not the color of skin or whatever. Yeah. So that was, I think, the profound impact I think the Bitcoin has had. And it's not so much necessarily Bitcoin, but the Bitcoiners,
Yeah, I think, well, I definitely agree that it seems to me in this space, or at least insofar as it exists on Twitter, character and ideas are far more important than whatever else.
Right.
And, what you say, I mean, it's underappreciated perhaps how powerful self-acceptance can be, and it's not blind and absolute self-acceptance, because you always want to be pursuing refinement of some kind, as we've been discussing, moral refinement, possibly the most important of them, but to accept an aspect of yourself in that process, and not always be so second guessing and wishing it were otherwise and looking back on mistakes and being like, and I think that's very powerful. And also what you said, which I think a lot of people in this space probably resonate with too, is just, and it's related to self-acceptance, which is a feeling of authenticity.
Yes.
Like, oh, like for whatever, and this, I'll throw this back at you as a question in terms of why is it that this thing allows you to feel like you have license or can be yourself? Like, what is it about this thing that grants you that license?
To be who I am, you mean? To be authentic, you mean?
Yeah, because it's a very liberating thing to just be like, hey, this is me, and of course I'm going to change over the course of years, but take it or leave it, basically.
I think it's
the fact that
I mean,
that this has inspired that.
I mean, I think that one way or the other, I think we need to experience love, to be perceived by someone as truly who we are. And that love, the gift of love, the perception that frees us, I think. And that, I mean, that, it can be just a moment that happens spontaneously for some people, but that I think some kind of, whether that could be another human being or could be, some people maybe do psychedelics, like ayahuasca, but I think that I fundamentally believe that there has to be the presence of love. In the presence of love, then we are able to allow, accept ourselves as who we are, with our own flaws and imperfection. And in that presence of love, we can choose. We have a choice to change ourselves, and it would not come from like somebody trying to change someone, like saying you should do this or you should do that, or even someone who loves you so deeply, but if that person does not have that love, through acceptance, then we won't actually change, and I think that somehow I was given that love, to be able to accept myself and say, yeah, it's okay, and to realize that there wasn't anything wrong with me to begin with. It's just all made up in our mind.
Yeah. And I wonder too, again, reflecting back on some of the things we've already discussed, how much does it reinforce self-acceptance when you know that you're engaging with something that's going to treat you the same as it treats everybody else, regardless of background, status, wealth, anything? And here I'm referring to Bitcoin, right? Like, where else do you have that type of relationship? There's always some kind of intermediary. There's always some kind of difference in approach or treatment. But now you're engaging with something that basically says to you in how it treats you, you're just as valid as anybody else.
Right.
And then you get to engage in a network that helps you steer how you might continue to engage in the process of refinement.
Definitely. And I think that for me, when I discovered Bitcoin and Bitcoiners, I guess, and when I finally was able to accept myself, then I realized everything, like all the things that I've done in my life, working hard to achieve something, whether that is the cause for social justice or, defending freedom or whatever, it was driven, basically, was my desire to go home. I wanted to return back home, where I came from. And I think that, somebody said once, all sickness is homesickness, and that cure is, brought by us returning home. And yeah, so I think that I realized that it's just, I wanted to go back home. And somehow, like, we are exiled from the state of paradise or the world as it is, and the world is intervened, that we cannot have a connection to the world as it is, world that just as it is perfect, and that and somehow we started the journey that we have to keep going. We cannot go back, and I think Bitcoin brings us, each one of us, back home. And that once we go back home, then it's like the is it the T.S. Eliot? I think he wrote this poem that after exploring, we shall never cease from exploration. At the end of exploration, the place for the first time, and that's it. It was the moment of, okay, now I actually somehow something happened. My brain was blown up or whatever, that I was able to go back to where I come from, or, before I developed my rational thinking or whatever, where I was one with my heart, and that I'm at peace with myself, and that state of peace that is generated from each person as a presence, I think that's spread, so it's not like, I think Bitcoiners are trying to make someone happy or trying to do something, but it's the state of being, the state of peacefulness, the authenticity that comes from that state of peace at the energetic level, that create a network effect, a powerful network effect that allow everyone to, invite everyone to go home, and then, that's, I think, and it's not going home, this return back home, it's not to regress back to this infantile stage, but it's to bring wisdom that you attained through the journey, the pain, suffering, and, and some of us are wounded, in the process, and then, and go back to that state of peacefulness, I guess, and claim your own individuality, that's something that makes you be a unique person. And so I think that's what Bitcoin is kind of facilitating. I think it's kind of each, bringing each person, like it's almost like a protocol, is calling each person to come home, and then once you come home and you become Bitcoiner, go down deep into the rabbit hole, somehow you find the treasure, it's you are engaged in this hero and heroine's journey, and then you find this treasure of individuality, that's something that is just eternal, like eternal value that gives, and then once you attain this, you never feel like you need to become someone else,
right.
You accept yourself fully. Then of course, you could accept other person freely as well. You don't need to make other person to be somebody else, because you are happy, you are, what I mean? So I think that deep transformation that is happening around this technology. I mean, that's I think, how would you say that? I mean, that's spiritual. I mean, that's again, like go back to the second coming of the Christ, right? I mean, that's the only way that I can describe this, right?
Yeah, I think that's extremely well said. And the only thing I'll add, I guess, is to that point, I think we've reflected already on the fact that it seems to be that relationships amongst Bitcoiners seem to develop very rapidly, and on a level of authenticity and depth that is quite rare. Right. And maybe it's the case that by virtue of, you could almost say, like, what is love? Well, part of love is someone treating you as though they're not separate from them, like they're giving you the equal assignment of divinity and the equal assignment of unconditional love, and that creates a connection. And this protocol is establishing relationships, albeit quote unquote economic, between us, and which is basically saying you're not different from them, you're not different from them, you're all connected by in the same way, and to each of you is ascribed the same treatment and value. And maybe that's just, not only, of course, is that attracting, people that might see that and be attracted to it and coming in, but maybe it's just training everyone who's engaged to that to be looking at relationships in that way. And if we can kind of extend and say, well, that is the basis of loving relationships, then this thing would seem to be at least fostering or training or incentivizing people to treat each other on similar terms, which you might call, love in some way, obviously not romantic, but like,
and then, I think that's something that I was kind of, I was thinking about how the fiat system is debt-based, right? It's the debt, so that it's you owe something. It's I owe you, and I owe you something, and then it's kind of based on this expectation, the future expectation of repayment, And then Bitcoin is a new class of asset. It's not debt-based. And so when I think about this, it's like when you act out of love, if you do something because you love to do, if you do something for someone you love, or you engage in activities that give you tremendous love and joy, you don't expect anything in return, right? Like, I mean, I think that most of us don't expect anything in return. Like you do things because the act itself give you already value. The action, activity, or engaging with the person itself produces already in intrinsic value. So you don't expect anything in return. So that does not incur debt. That doesn't expect the future repayment. And what it would be like to create a transaction, network exchanges with people based on love, not based on debt. So that, you are just doing it, because you love doing it, and you don't expect anything in return. And that love secures freedom, because you are allowing someone to be free in their response. They don't have to pay me back, you see? So I think Bitcoin started, the Satoshi actually started with the invention of Bitcoin, started a new cycle of gifting, new cycle of, something that radically different from what we have, and that, again, going back to Christian's thing, that Satoshi paid our sin, that we don't have any karma or something, that now we can start a new civilization based on love, and that we don't have to be enslaved by this. I have to repay, the sense of relationship based on necessity and obligation, but relationship based on love, that we can maybe, strive for that, completely new relationship,
Yeah, no, I mean, like, of course, we're using what some will seem as like woo-woo language, but I mean,
right.
it makes sense, and just the final point about Bitcoiners and how many times when we meet each other at conferences and stuff, there's a lot of love, right? There's a lot of hugging, there's a lot of engaged conversations, there's a lot of respect. And back to that point about this system reinforcing or fostering that, it's like, it would be weird almost to engage with people economically on terms that assign equal value to both, right? Same treatment, everyone's the same, everyone's connected with no intermediary, and then to show up in person and be like, oh, I'm way better than you, or like, to have that disparity. And so it just seems to be creating these relationships that are already predicated on a type of like the fundamentals of or the principles of love, and then when you actually just get together in the flesh, you get to make it more real in some way.
Yeah, it's like abundance. Like we are not there to extract something. Like we are not there to get something, you know. But just we are all abundant. So like we are just sharing, you know, what we have, kind of, you know. And I don't know about you, but do you feel like when you see Bitcoiners, you know, do you feel like you know them? Like there is this connection that, wow, you know, I only met this person like for 30 minutes, but I feel like, oh my God, you know, she or he might be like a friend for life, kind of, you know?
100%. It's happened many, many times. And again, like, should we not expect that? Because those people too submitted themselves to these values that are the limitations of the system. They submitted themselves to truth. They submitted themselves to freedom. So if we've both done that, I mean, that's 99% of the way on a, you know, a relationship, you know?
And then maybe we chose to come here to do that, to be a part of this, right? Part of this experiment. So that, you know, how many percentage of people that, I mean, you know what I mean? It's like for us to meet, you know, face to face. I mean, that's like incredible, right? It's almost like there is this mutual agreement or contract or something that goes deep, you know. It's not, it just didn't happen accidentally. Like, you know, this person lived there, you know, his or her life, and then come to blockchain, you know, at this time. And then, like you're saying, and decided to be a part of it, right? I mean, that's quite amazing, you know.
It's incredible. I mean, like I say, anytime I go to a conference, like half the time is just spent hugging, you know, because like, and I've brought this up on the podcast before, but you know, because there's a lot of like NIMs on Twitter and stuff, right? So you've never actually seen their face, you don't know anything about them, but they'll come up and they'll be like, I'm so and so, and even though you don't know anything about them other than they're in, like, they're a Bitcoiner and maybe you've seen some tweets and you're like, I know you, give me a hug. You know, it's who knows if this will last and how it'll play out and all that kind of stuff. There's many unknowns, but as you said a few minutes ago, just incredibly excited and grateful to be around to see this unfold and participate in it in some small way.
Yes.
Well, we covered a lot of ground. Is there anything you wanted to discuss or get off your chest before we shut it down?
I do really appreciate your work, you know, what you do. And, you know, you bring, you know, open up a space for us to deeply engage, you know, and that, you know, I mean, usually like in a Twitter space, it's kind of more, we cannot go deep, I think, you know, but I think the discussion that we're having here is very important. And so I like to say that I really appreciate your work, you know.
Well, thank you. And likewise,
and then you make me
really
feel like I'm not the only one who is crazy, you know.
Freaks of the world unite.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I very much appreciate that. And the same back to you. I've really enjoyed your writing and recently some of the other, I listened to you on Alex's podcast as well. And look, I mean, like I said at the beginning, we might be 100% wrong on all this, but I don't think we're ever going to know unless we have these conversations and we're not afraid to have them. And we try to show up with logic and reason and historical context and everything, and try to be honest with each other and try to be pursuing the truth rather than whatever else, the truth above all else. And maybe at some point we'll wind up in a better place. I mean, that's the element of faith. Pursue that. Maybe things will be better in the future. And so I thank you for, you know, being a willing participant in this kind of discussion today. And I'm sure we'll have another one at some point in the future.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, Nozomi. See ya.